Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Book Goodies author series of podcasts. I'm Deborah Carney, your host, and I have with me today a very special author, Barry Adkins. Hi, Barry. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Deborah?
I'm fine. You have a story that you had to tell in a very special way, and that you actually had a very interesting journey. And the story is about that journey. So why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and give us a little background?
So my name is Barry Adkins. On July 10th of 2005, my son started the process of moving out on his own. His friends decided to throw a little housewarming party for him that night. Sometime around midnight, they started doing shots. He passed out. His buddies laid him on his side in bed in case he vomited. While he was passed out, the party was still going on. They shaved his head and his legs. But one of his friends was a little worried about him, so he went back in to check on him around 4 a.m. and found him blue and not breathing. He died alone in the hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed.
Yeah, that's, I have a little bit of a similar story. My son died alone in the hospital after a car accident while I was on the train going to the hospital. I was in New York City and he was in Camden, New Jersey. So they tell you that parents know these things. And what was really odd, and I don't know if this is your experience as well, I was kind of shielded. It's like whoever is in charge of us kind of shielded me. And yet when I started telling people that Danny had passed away, 3 different people had premonitions that day about me losing one of my children, but they didn't know which one. And I actually had a premonition about losing my other son. And I said that, said to myself, because I was on a bus, and I said to myself, well, people can get a hold of me if there's a problem. Nothing is wrong because people can get a hold of me if there was a problem. And, 2 hours later, I got the phone call. So you're sleeping peacefully, and the phone rings, and it's the hospital, or it's his friend, or...
No, actually, the next morning, Sunday morning, I was sitting in the living room drinking coffee with my wife, and the doorbell rang, and it was the police at my door, and there was actually 2 policemen and someone in plain clothes, but it never occurred to me that something bad had happened. I thought it probably had something to do with a neighbor or a dog barking or something like that. Mm-hmm. Turns out that was not at all the case.
Wow. That's pretty difficult to take on. And then you had a unique way of going through the grieving process. Why don't you explain that to us?
So obviously, after you lose a child, there's a lot of self-pity, and you're just devastated by the news. But one of the things I understood early on was that, I didn't want anybody else feeling sorry for me, that, I could handle that all by myself. I didn't want to be a victim.
Right.
And so I wanted to make something good come from this tragedy, because I believe that the most you can hope for when you lose a child is to try to make something good come from it. There's really, for me, that's the most you can hope for. There's no money. There's nothing anybody can say that can change the fact that your son is gone, but making something good come from it is really the most you can hope for. In an effort to do that, I decided to walk with his ashes from our home here in Gilbert, Arizona to Kalispell, Montana. And probably the first question is, why would you do that? Kevin grew up here in Arizona, but I grew up in Kalispell, and he always talked about wanting to move there someday and buy a ranch. So I wanted to get him to where he wanted to be someday.
That's awesome. And you made this journey by yourself?
No, actually, so in the beginning I thought I might walk along the Continental Divide or something, and nobody would really even know I was doing it. But I decided to try to, share his story with as many people as I could along the way. I partnered with an organization called Not My Kid, and they set up speaking engagements all along the way. I told the story probably 40 or 50 times in a 4-month span. Tens of thousands of people, lots of radio and television interviews and newspaper articles. Just trying to build awareness, and really, when I tell the story, I just tell the story about what happened. I don't really do it. It's not in a preachy way. It's just, here's what happened.
Here's what happened. Take care of your kids. Make sure your kids know the dangers. And alcohol poisoning is one of those things that, for a while there were a lot of them reported from fraternity and sorority initiations, and alcohol has been an accepted part of our society for a long time, and people challenge each other to drinking contests. And those are the kinds of things that we need kids and grown-ups. But, kids need to start saying no, because they don't know yet how their body is going to react to alcohol. They don't know. They just don't know. They don't know enough because they haven't had enough experience with it. And there have been too many parties that have ended in tragedy because all of a sudden somebody passes out and they weren't passed out and they never got back up.
Right. That's exactly right. Kids don't realize what can happen, and it's not that I'm advocating going back to the days of Prohibition, because that would be silly.
Mm-hmm.
What I am advocating is education and helping people understand what the consequences of your decisions will be.
Right.
And that's the key thing is, education is what I think is really the solution, is educating people about what can happen. I tell kids all the time, so when you go out drinking, let's list the good things that can happen, and now let's list all of the bad things that can happen. And as you can imagine, the list of bad things is rather long.
Yeah, everything from DUI to dying from alcohol poisoning. And unfortunately in our country, there are not enough people that understand alcohol poisoning unless you know someone personally who died from it. It's just one of those things that nobody talks about. And probably because of the family can be embarrassed that that's how their child died, or someone, if it's an older person, they're just like, oh, well, he was an alcoholic and he drank himself to death. And they don't realize that, it is a real problem. People's bodies all react differently to alcohol. 5 shots might be totally great for you. 5 shots could kill someone else. And also they don't understand that, if you're going to have a drinking game, use beer. Don't use the bottle of vodka for a drinking game. And there's just too much, our country doesn't allow marijuana, but people don't die from marijuana poisoning. And not that I'm advocating it, I'm just saying, something that's legally available in our country can really devastate more than just the families of drunk drivers. It's the families of the kids and the adults who just overdrink just because they don't know any better.
Yeah, I guess to open your eyes to it, you can go on Google and type in alcohol addiction, and you get somewhere around 87 million hits.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. And part of your journey was to enlighten people. And where are some of the places that you stopped and spoke? Were you speaking at schools? Were you speaking at churches? Where were the places that they had you stop and speak?
It was primarily schools, but I did churches, I did treatment facilities, you name it. There was kids that had been caught drinking, and that was part of their punishment, was going to these facilities, and I would speak there. So a wide range of places, but probably primarily schools, and primarily schools.
Well, because again, older people, adults they can gauge better. They've drunk until they pass out, and it's young kids that don't know their level. And
Right.
the shots are the especially bad thing, because when you just guzzle, it hasn't hit you, because it takes a little while for it all to, but you've multiplied it, and it takes a while before your body catches up and shuts it down, either with you passing out or worse.
Yep, that is exactly correct.
Okay, so now you're on this journey. Did you decide to write the book while you were walking, before you were walking, or how did that idea come about?
Well, I'm probably in the huge minority in terms of authors, because I had no interest in writing a book. Actually, when I got back from the walk, I told a couple friends, I kept a journal along the way, and I told them that I was going to send them a copy of the journal along with some pictures from the walk, and they said, no, you have to write a book about this. And at first I said I wasn't going to do it, but because the last thing I wanted to do was commit to another major project after walking 1,400 miles. But after a while, I decided to go ahead and do it. So again, I'm in the far minority in that writing a book was never on my bucket list. No.
Okay. Well, and that's important to know, because a lot of authors, or a lot of people listening to this podcast in particular, may be people who've gone through something, and they kept a journal while they went through, but they think it's only of interest to them, and they don't know that it can actually be extremely helpful to other people. And I'm talking to myself as well as I'm talking to you. There are people that want to know the story, and there are other people that don't ever want me to talk about my son passing away. And I think I've finally come to a point where I know that I need to write that book. And
yeah, I agree. There's a lot of people out there that have incredible stories that have never put them down on paper, and it is a lot of work to do it, but it's also helpful because you get to put together a story, and I think that's sort of healing and helpful both.
Well, and it's healing, and it's helpful, and it's putting something permanent out there to validate his life.
Yeah.
I mean, your son was I would assume, like any other kid, he was an incredible kid. He wasn't a drug addict. He wasn't a alcoholic. He just had a bad night. And, somebody they overdid it without knowing what the consequences could be. There was no malicious intent. And his life deserves to be celebrated. And your journey, the walk that you took, why you took it, what you did along the way of that journey, is not only good for awareness on the alcohol poisoning, but it's also an awareness of how to deal with grief. I was a basket case for 3 years, and I had other children to take care of, and other parents need to understand that however they choose to grieve is okay. And I think that that's why books like yours are important. You're telling two stories.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's the part about the alcohol poisoning, but there's also how I dealt with the grief and how it feels strange for me to say it, but other people see that as an inspiration, in terms, because let's face it, we're all going to be facing adversity at some point in our lives. And when I talk to the kids, I tell them that too. It's not if you're going to face adversity, it's when you're going to face it. And it's how you respond to it that largely defines your life.
Yeah. And most, a lot of parents don't want to think about losing their child. But again, I live in New York City. Children are dying every day,
Yes.
And I was living in New York City when my son passed away, and I worked for doctors. I worked for a doctor's office at the time, which was part of what helped me somewhat. And, one of the doctors was like, I deal with people every day who've lost their children. And, you look around New York City, and because it's so concentrated, there's 8 million people here. It's a very concentrated population, and you watch the news every night. And, you think to yourself, I thought to myself, why am I, I can't excuse myself for grieving. I can't make myself stop grieving. But I also think about, how do all these other parents do it? How do you get through it? How do you move on? And, again, you have to grieve in your own way. How long after he passed away did you start the walk?
It took, so he died in July 2005, and I started on the walk in February of 2007. We had logistical things to consider because I thought about taking off that next year, but we really weren't ready to go, and I couldn't leave in the wintertime.
No.
Because there would be weather issues that would be a little tough to deal with. And I couldn't go in the summertime because all the schools were closed.
Okay.
So that sort of settled on leaving in late February in 2007. So it was about a year and a half after he passed away.
So you were already dealing with a lot of the grief issues, and you were still at the point where you realized that I know what it is a year and a half in, and it's still not good. And for
one of the grief issues that you that I personally took a while to come to grips with, the part about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Kevin was my son. It's easy to forgive him. And I had forgiven the people at the party because ultimately this was Kevin's decision.
Mm-hmm.
But the person that is the hardest to forgive is yourself. And you see this in, when they talk about the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, they talk about struggling to forgive themselves for what happened to one of their buddies. And, that forgiving yourself for what happened is such an important part of the healing process, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Every single day I replayed in my mind, and I'm like, he didn't have to get in that car. He didn't have to go. He didn't have to, my son was killed in a car accident. It was raining. They should have not gone yet. They, and it's just, he was the only one even injured in the accident. And the police didn't think, they didn't do measurements or anything to see if there was any, alcohol involved or anything like that, because they didn't, he was ejected from the car, but he wasn't, they didn't know he was critically injured yet. So it was, you run through your head and you go, I told him he didn't have to go. I wish he would stayed home. I wish I got home earlier that day. You run through this in your mind, whether it's logical or not. And my other son looked at me and said, Mom, if he had stayed home, he would have died choking on a potato chip or something that night. That was his time. And you still can't, you don't get it. It takes you a long time to get that through your head.
Yeah, it's forgiving yourself is by far the most difficult thing to do, but you have to do it, or it will destroy you. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the stories too about parents who have lost children, and it destroys their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I got to say that if I didn't have my other child that relied on me, and my daughter, and other people around that really needed me, I got to that point where I didn't want to be around anymore. I mean, I never really thought about killing myself, but I really got to the point where, why bother? And, I warned people around me. I said, if I get to a point where I feel even worse about this, I will check myself into a hospital. And so if you get a phone call, you need to come here and take care of your brother, because I'm going to, I'm that close that I will hospitalize myself. I wouldn't take my own life, but you do get to that point where you're like, why bother? And then that upsets the rest of your family.
Yeah.
And, that upsets everybody else in the family, because then they're like, well, was he the most important thing in our lives? You don't care about me anymore. and you have to balance. I mean, my son that died a few years after his brother looked at me, like a year after his brother died, and said, "Mom, I'm still here." I haven't died, and it really just is a very long process. And I'll share one last thing before we get back to you. I was at an event the weekend after my son died, and a woman came up to me. I used to show cats, and there's kind of a hierarchy. There's the people who win all the time, and then there's the people like us that we were around, but we weren't anything in the upper echelon type of thing. And a woman that had never spoken to me before, more than just a passing glance, walked over to me, and she gave me a hug, and she said to me, "My son died when he was 21 years old, 21 years ago today. And I know what you're going through, and I'm not going to tell you that it's going to get better." She says, "I'm going to tell you that it's going to get worse, and then it's going to be tolerable." She says, "It will never get better, but you will learn to live with it." And on my worst days, that woman's words were the ones that I stuck with. And you took a very long journey, and I'm sure planning the journey was part of your healing process as well.
Sure, it was.
And now, to get more technical about your book, where did you self-publish it? Did a publishing house pull it together for you? What happened?
Well, I sent out a few letters to major publishing, to agents and that sort of thing, and got either no response or thanks but no thanks. And then I started looking at the self-publishing stuff, and there's lots of good ones out there, but I didn't feel like I saw, they were interested in helping me publish the book, but none of them seemed personal interest in the marketing or any of that sort of stuff. And so, and anyone can do this. I basically became my own publisher. I found a guy to edit the book. I used book clubs to critique the book, which, by the way, was one of the best things I did. I gave book club copies of the book as I had it. I had them read it, and then I went back to the meeting with them. First question was, what did you like about the book? They told me all the things they liked about it, but the real question was, now, every one of you has to tell me one thing you did not like about the book.
Oh, I like that.
And that was really the nuggets I was looking for. What did you think I was missing? What did you think I should have talked about more? And that was very helpful. So, I mean, there's lots of editors out there that can help you edit a book. I found someone to design the cover. There's lots of printers out there that print on demand. I used one here in Phoenix, Snowfall Press. And then, so we print the book from there for the website. I use CreateSpace and Amazon for the Amazon part of it. That's really a pretty painless process once you get your ISBN number and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You just upload the cover and upload the text, and next thing you know, you've got a book.
Yeah. Now, is it available electronically on the Kindle as well, or is it only available in print?
Yeah, it's available on the Nook. It's available on iBooks. It's available. The Kindle is available both from and from the website. So
that's great. And you've hit upon what a lot of authors are telling me is that first of all, you don't want to wait 2 years for a traditional publisher to get it out. Once you, like you said, you're the accidental author. You're not an author that grew up thinking you had a book inside you to write. And you needed people to help you out, but once you were done with the book, you wanted to be done with the book.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't want to, you didn't want an agent and a long-term relationship with a publisher. You just wanted the book to go and then, do what you need to do to market it, but let it tell its story and just get it out there. And I think through a traditional publisher, they have a formula the way they want a book like that to read, and they want to make things more dramatic than they are, and they would maybe do a cover that you didn't like and tell the story in a way that wasn't true to you, just because they want to make it fit their formulas. So this way you got it edited the way you wanted it. You had a cover designed by someone that was good at designing covers, and I love the book club idea. You just reached out to a local book club and said, here's the book, tell me what you like and tell me what you don't like. And I think that's great. I've talked to a lot of people that use beta authors, and I know I kind of did that when I was pushing one book around, but it's a really good idea to get out there to someone who doesn't know, who isn't close to the story, and have them tell you the things that they didn't get. I didn't understand this, or like you said, what should I have talked about that I didn't talk about? And
just start the writing process and get, I had 230 or 250 pages down on paper within 6 months, but it's putting that in a way that somebody can read it that knows nothing about the story. That is where all of the work comes in.
Yeah.
When I tell people, I've had people ask me questions, and I tell them, when you're creating, just write and don't worry about anything else except writing.
Mm-hmm.
Editing, that's a completely different animal. Stephen King, actually, of all the books I read about writing, he has a book on writing that I would recommend to anybody, because after reading that, I understood sort of why I did things. I was doing things similar to what he talked about, but, he goes through what his process is.
I totally forgot about that book until just now. I read that years ago. I got to go dig that back out. You are exactly right. He went through his process and said, just do it. And then after you're done the creative process, then he's probably one of the guys who said, let it sit for a little while and then come back to it. Yep, exactly.
Let it wait for a little while, and he talked about how when you're doing that, he would close the door to his office. He didn't want anyone talking to him. He didn't want any interaction with people, and my wife was very tolerant of that. I said, I don't want to talk to anybody. Don't come in and ask me anything. Just let me do my thing and follow a thought process through. And that's, when you're in that creative part of it, that's really important to just follow the thought process. Don't worry about whether it's all written perfectly. Just follow the thought process.
Well, and it's good to hear that your wife was supportive throughout this whole thing. I was already divorced when my child died, and I didn't want to have anything to do with having to help anybody else get through the grieving process. I literally looked at everyone in my family and I said, don't expect me to be emotionally available to you, because right now I'm totally shattered. And my daughter and my other son got, they understood and they got through it, but I didn't have a spouse either for support or non-support. So I'm glad that you had the support of your wife going through that too. She had her own grief process to go through, which I'm sure was different than what you went through.
Yep, exactly right.
All right. Well, since this is kind of aimed at accidental writers, if you're talking to somebody and they think they have a story inside them and they haven't started it yet, what would your advice be?
Just start writing. Again, don't critique. I think, and you can probably relate to this, sometimes you think as soon as you start writing you have to make it perfect the first time through. Mm-hmm. And I tell you how many, I think I was on revision 50-some before I got through. Just start writing and write down what you know, what you're thinking about, and get all of that stuff in whatever order down on paper, at least from my perspective, and then you can go back and start trying to put it in some sort of order that makes sense. But, just, and it can be your own voice. Everybody's writing style is different. I wanted to make sure that I wrote this in a way that if one of my friends picked it up, they would say, yeah, he said that. Mm-hmm. I can believe about that. And sometimes writing classes teach you how to write, but everybody has their own style, and it's that unique style that quite often comes out and makes a book stand out.
Yeah. And that's really true. Like when you go to writing classes, there's all these formulas and genres and all this other stuff, but basically what it comes down to is you're a storyteller, and you have a story to tell, and you go ahead and go through the process of getting it out, and then you go through the process of fixing it up and making it so other people can understand the story. And and I have to commend you for going through the process. I really do. Like I said, the first 3 years I was a basket case. I could barely function day to day. And for you to be able to have gone through, and maybe it's because you had the support of your wife, and you had a goal that you knew you wanted to achieve for him, and you took the time to plan out the walk. And like you said, you had no intention of writing a book when you went on the walk. You went on the walk for the sake of going on the walk, and for making his life stand up for something by doing your talks all along the way.
So one thing I didn't mention was how the idea to actually walk there came about. As I said, we wanted to take his ashes to Montana. I don't know whether anybody out there will remember the movie Lonesome Dove. Had Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall. If you haven't seen it, it's not a 4-hour movie, but it's a real good movie. And that was one of Kevin's favorite movies. And suffice to say, there's a point where one of the characters takes the body of one of the other characters back to Texas to bury him where he was the happiest. In the movie, it's a Western. He did it on horseback. I figured if I did it on horseback, I would probably never make it, so I decided to walk.
Well, yeah, horses aren't allowed a lot of places. In Arizona, you can have them almost anywhere, but once you got out of Arizona, you were in trouble.
Yeah, riding with a horse next to the highway seemed like a hazardous thing to do. It was hazardous enough to walk.
Now, there's an interesting question. Did you walk along major highways? Did you take back roads? How did you, did you have somebody following you in a car that could help you out if you, got tired, or?
Well, the first thing to say is that I did not sleep under any bridges. I stayed in hotels every night. My daughter and her fiance walked quite a bit of it. They would alternate days with me.
Okay.
And then my wife met me once we settled into a routine, she met me about every 3.5 miles, and I would take a break, get a bite to eat, stretch, do those things. It took me a while to figure out it really wasn't a race.
Right.
I walked along. I didn't walk along any freeways. I stayed off the freeways, but there was plenty of rather busy roads.
Right.
So, and people, it's amazing when you get out. People stopped every day to talk to me and see what was going on, or ask me if I needed a ride. Is everything okay? Because when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're walking along the road, there's a lot of people wondering, well, why is he walking out here?
Especially through Arizona and Utah and.
Yeah, there's in Utah and even Montana. There's a lot of wide open space out there, and it's a long ways between towns, and people would be and stop. And if it was a rainy or a snowy day, I might get 5, 6, 7, 8 people stop and talk to me and see if I needed a ride. They're like, well, we're walking out here in the rain and the snow. Mm-hmm. I ought to stop and see if he needs a ride.
And that's a good testament to, to the American culture still, that there are still people out there that will stop and be helpful and see if you need something. And, we get so jaded and think that, it's that people don't help each other anymore. And they still do. Even in New York City, where people don't think anybody helps anybody.
Yeah, that's the one thing that you learn is that there's still a lot of really good people out there. I mean, I had ladies bring me brownies and milk. I'll never forget a guy who stopped. He was driving an old Datsun, which that tells you how old it was. It's probably a 72 Datsun. And he stopped and talked to me for a while, and he's an older gentleman. And when we got through with it, he handed me $5 and said, "Make sure you go get yourself something to eat when you're done tonight."
Aww.
And there's part of me that did not want to take that because, the idea wasn't to raise money.
Right.
People contributed, but that wasn't the idea. But to deny them that joy of saying they helped in some small way, you can't do that. So,
you get it. You understand that. There are so many people out there that do not understand that. And I learned it a long time ago. And people are like, I don't want to take a handout. I don't want to take money from somebody. They aren't offering you their house or whatever. They're offering you just something to say that they participated and they helped and they gave you something,
Yeah, I am that joy.
Yeah, it's joyful for them to do it. And I know so many people that are like, no, it's charity. No, it's not charity. It's giving somebody that joy. I'm so glad you understand that. Because it's mostly men that don't get it.
Yeah.
Women get it and men don't.
Plenty of time to think when you're walking 14 miles every day.
Yeah, and that's and it's day after day. Were there times that you had to stay overnight a couple of days, or did you just go straight through?
No, we went straight through. I averaged about 90 miles a week, and I had given myself a little bit of margin because we had to set up a date for the finish in Kalispell. But I didn't have a single sick day or weather day in 4 months. There were some days I didn't feel well, and the weather wasn't good, but I always figured, well, it could be worse tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I better walk today in case it's worse tomorrow. And honestly, the further I went, the better I felt. Getting out of Arizona was a lot of work. Until you really settle into a routine, I will say it was a little uncomfortable at times, but the further I went, when I got into Idaho and Montana, I was settled into a routine. And yeah, I'm tired at the end of the day, but I know exactly what to expect.
Right. Such a story. And I love the fact that you sort of self-published. You got out there and you found what you needed.
I am my own publisher, which people ask me that all the time. I say, well, it's me.
It's me.
Anyone can do that. If I can I tell everybody, it's like I talk about the walk. If I can pull off something like this, imagine what somebody that really has no active other could do. Anymore, there's so much information out there, and, I think people tend to worry about that last step in finding a publisher. You'll get there. There's authors clubs, and there's lots of self-publishing organizations out there. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them or most of them, and they'll help you with that process. There's no doubt about that.
And that's important for writers to know. My day job is internet marketing, and a lot of people work from home and they're isolated from everybody else. But we now have monthly meetups across the country, and we have conventions twice a year that we all go to, and where you can do face-to-face and meet people and not be isolated anymore. And writers are another group of people that are pretty isolated, and they need to reach outside their comfort zone. And find somebody. You can't do it all alone. You can independently publish, or self-publish or whatever you want to call it, but you really do need people to help you along the way. Don't put that manuscript up there without having somebody else read it and somebody else proofread it and, somebody else critique it for you. Because...
The other that I had heard, too, and I did this a lot, was read it out loud.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I wanted to say. And then you read it out loud, or have somebody else read it out loud to you. And a lot of times you'll go, wait a minute.
That doesn't sound right.
That does not sound right. I need to fix that. Make a note.
Yep, and that's one of the things that I haven't done yet that I need to do. My son did write some fiction, and I need to do something with it because I made a promise to him 2 weeks before he passed away, actually. He said, what will happen to my work? He was a prolific writer, and he was at NYU in a writing program. And he said, what will happen to my work if something happens to me? And I said, I will get it out there for people to read and get and enjoy. And I'm still working on that. And one of the things I did is I published one of his fiction books, but I didn't do it right. And I know I didn't do it right. And it is out there, and a lot of people have downloaded it, and a lot of people have read it and purchased it and this and that. But the book isn't what the book is supposed to be because I didn't go through all the steps. And I did have other people critique it and all that kind of stuff, but I never read it out loud. And I think that's what is missing from that book. One person who read it for me recently said, there's no emotional connection to the good guy that makes you root for him over the antagonist. So right. I'm like, oh, that's a problem.
Yeah, there are fundamental things that they teach in those. You want to root for the good guy, and the more things you can do to make them want to root for the good guy, the better off you are. I mean, the interesting thing for me is that people have told me that they both laughed and cried when they read the book, and I said, well done. I guess I've done my job because, you want to make an emotional connection to the good guy in the book and, root for them to get done with whatever they want to do or what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and that's excellent. That's just that. Like you said, you want to make them cry, but you want to make them laugh. You want to make them feel the pain, but you want to make them feel the joy. So,
yeah, and that's the thing is that it takes a while to develop your sense of humor again after you lose a child, but it is possible to do it. We still laugh about ourselves. We talk about Kevin all the time. I personally think it's therapeutic to do that.
Yeah.
Not like he never existed. And sometimes people are afraid to say anything about, when you lose a child, they're afraid to say anything about the child. But I love talking about him. I still do.
Yeah, because he was a great kid. He just, his life ended way too soon. One of the hardest things for me was when I would finally let myself get out and talk to people. And I would meet new people, and they would be parents, and they would say, so, how many children do you have? And I would automatically say 3. Oh, well, how old are they? One of them is 28, the other one is 26, and the other one died.
Yeah.
And then, you don't know how to answer the question, and then you, everything becomes awkward. So, it's something that you learn to deal with, but it's also something that the first few times you hear it, it's just like you just, you go in your head and you're like, how should I answer this question? Oh, I have a daughter now. I have a grandson. And, for people who didn't know my boys, it's easier to not go through the whole story. And, because then you're not talking about simple small talk anymore. So, to make it easier on people, it's just, oh, I have a daughter and a grandson. And if it comes up later on, yes, I had 2 boys, and this is what they did, and whatnot. But, and I just love what you did so much. I know I've said that several times, but I mean, you did the perfect combination of awareness and grieving, and then in the end of it, you know, other people told you that you needed to write the book. And the book is the culmination of everything else you did up until then. And that's something that a lot of writers that have gone through painful experiences need to understand is, and you said it, it's therapeutic. It's going to help you understand. It's going to help you teach others. And it's also going to let people know that they're not alone. Too many people think that they're the only ones going through something, and that they're, you know, I didn't want to hear about it. You know, people wanted me to give me books on grieving, and I'm like, nope, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The book doesn't really deal with grieving directly. It's more, you know, what I decided to do, and in an indirect way it is, but as I said, it sort of serves as an inspiration to other people. As I always say, if I can pull off something like that, imagine what you could do.
Yeah. You took people on a journey. You went on a journey. And it was, you know, it started because of a bad experience, but it ended being something that your family did together. And that's what I was getting at when I was asking if you did it alone. I wanted to know if you know, like you said, your daughter and your wife, you know, they would drive up and, you know, stop, and they made the journey with you. They just didn't do the walking with you. You did the walk by yourself.
Yep, basically how it went.
All right.
Just,
well,
you know, they've done it by themselves, but I don't know. I had no intention of doing this one by myself.
Yeah, and that's things just go the way we don't expect them to go. That's just the way it is. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's got to still be difficult to talk about it, even though you've gone through you know, all the book publicity and the walk and the speech, you know, the speaking and everything else. There's always that little tug at your heartstring every time you have to tell the story again. And I want to applaud you once more for being brave enough to share your story and your journey. And I hope it inspires someone else to share their story and their journey.
Thank you.
Now, tell people where they can find you on the internet. A lot of our folks listen via iTunes, and they aren't actually on our show notes page.
Yeah, so the website is kevinslastwalk.com. Twitter is @Kevin'sLastWalk. Facebook is Kevin's Last Walk. Yeah, if you Google any of those, if you Google Kevin's Last Walk or anything, and obviously you can connect Facebook and Twitter on the website.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And for all of those of you that would like to read the show notes and find out a little bit more, get the links directly to the book or whatever, come on over to BookGoodies, BookGoodies.com, and you can find them both. You can also connect with us on Twitter.com/BookGoodies and Facebook.com/BookGoodies. And we also want to thank Geekcast.fm for hosting our podcasts. And I want to thank Kevin again for sharing part of his day and part of his life with us. And if you want to know more about me, you can go to DeborahCarney.com. And folks, thank you for listening, and get out there and get writing, and have a great day.